Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. As I'm currently on a work trip visiting the Harry Potter Motherland, Edinburgh, Scotland, I've put together a compilation for you of some of the darkest, creepiest, most disturbing Harry Potter theories out there. As this is a compilation style video spanning years of the channel, please be aware of some varied audio levels, inconsistent numbering, and some, but hopefully not too much, repeated information. Also, before we dive in, I just want to mention that only 25% of you are subscribed, so if you enjoy the content, please subscribe to help support the channel. Anyway, let's get to it. Number 1. Voldemort possessed a fetus. This theory is certainly a crude one, and it essentially states that Voldemort's baby, or rudimentary form, that we see Pettigrew carrying around is the result of fetus possession. Let me explain. First of all, J.K. Rowling has been quoted as saying that the rough draft of the Goblet of Fire made her editor sick to her stomach. If this is the case, then this rather gruesome theory is likely the cause. It starts with Bertha Jorkins, who was a witch and Ministry of Magic employee. She was a few years ahead of James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew when she attended Hogwarts. In 1994, Bertha Jorkins made the unfortunate decision to take a trip to Albania. As we know, Voldemort and Pettigrew were in Albania at this exact same time. Pettigrew, a former peer of Jorkins, convinced her to take a stroll with him into the woods. It was here that Voldemort, who was hiding in Albania at the time, tortured and murdered Bertha. As we know, in order to create a Horcrux, murder is necessary, so in killing Bertha, Voldemort was able to turn his snake Nagini into a Horcrux. This is where the dark and twisted theory comes into play. The theory is that when Pettigrew killed Bertha, she was actually pregnant, and that Pettigrew took the fetus from her corpse. And it was this same fetus that Voldemort possessed, and Pettigrew dumped into the cauldron to produce the regeneration potion. This of course means that the body that we see Pettigrew carrying around is nothing more than a possessed fetus and the unborn child of Bertha Jorkins. Possession is one of the darkest forms of magic, and we know that Voldemort has mastered it, so it might just be a possibility. 2. Harry's grandparents. James and Lily Potter were murdered by Voldemort at the very young age of 21. So if James and Lily were only 21, it should be very safe to assume that some of Harry's grandparents would still be alive. J.K. Rowling has stated, and we've seen, that witches and wizards can live for a very long time, much longer than a normal human. So it always seems unusual that Harry wouldn't have a single grandparent. After all, he should have 4. This theory, however, discusses Harry's lineage on his mum's side. The books have stated that both of Lily's parents died normal Muggle deaths, without going into any detail. We know that they both died sometime between 1971 and 1981, because in 1971 they saw Lily off to Hogwarts at platform 9 and 3/4, and in 1981 Lily was murdered. We know them to be dead at this point. It's unusual that they would have died in this time frame, and I'm really not sure what constitutes a normal Muggle death. They weren't even old. What's a normal death? Cancer? Heart attack? It's really hard to say. Provided that all of the information we have on their deaths groups them together, and that they were so young, I suspect some foul play. Lily and James Potter were both very outgoing witches and wizards, joining the Order of the Phoenix and actively participating in the fight against evil. This meant that they were very much on the radar of the Death Eaters. In the Harry Potter films, we've seen many instances of Death Eaters tyrannizing Muggle London and attacking Muggles, so why would Lily's parents be an exception? The theory is that because Lily was so prominent in the fight against evil, having defied Voldemort 3 times, she made her family a target. Because her parents were both Muggles, they would have had no means of defending themselves, and the Death Eaters could have visited them and ended their lives instantly. In a deleted scene from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Harry approaches Petunia and says the following in reference to the Death Eaters. "They'll torture you. If they think for a moment that you know where I'm going, they'll stop at nothing." To which he responds, "You think I don't know what they're capable of?" To me, this implies that Petunia knows more about the wizarding world than previously implied. She's initially painted as a little bit ignorant towards everything going on, but really, I think that she knows exactly what's happening, because she's experienced it before with not only Lily, but her parents as well. 3. Ginny's love potion. Ginny and Harry, 2 peas in a pod, a truly beautiful couple, right? Well, wait until you hear this theory. The theory, put quite succinctly, is this: Ginny Weasley gave Harry Potter a love potion. The theory also suggests that Harry and Ginny only end up together for that reason, and for that reason alone. There are a few reasonably credible arguments for why this could in fact be the case, most of which I have rebuttals to, but for those you'll have to watch my full video on this theory in the description. One of the main bases for the theory is that Harry seemingly fell for Ginny quite suddenly. Up until the point at which they fell in love, they weren't particularly close, nor were there any direct indicators that they would or should end up together. One moment Harry is with Cho Chang, in another moment film Harry is flirting with a waitress at Sweet's Cafe, and the next minute he's married to Ginny with babies. So how could Harry have become so quickly infatuated with Ginny? The answer: a love potion. The main supporting argument for this theory is that love potions have been historically used by the Weasley clan, maybe not for this purpose, but used in jest and in other, less serious circumstances. The bottom line is that love potions have been used by them, and they certainly know how to make them. Ginny's own mother Molly admitted to using them in her youth, and Fred and George sold them, so their perspective on these types of potions can hardly be too severe. The love potion in question is called Amortentia, a powerful love potion that causes extreme infatuation or obsession from the drinker, not quite as romantic as we initially thought. 4. Dumbledore lets Sirius rot in Azkaban. As we know, Sirius Black is imprisoned in Azkaban after he's framed for Peter Pettigrew's crimes. Sirius ended up spending 12 years in the Island Fortress before escaping, but one question that fans have always asked is, why was he kept there for so long? Why wasn't he bailed out? Why didn't Dumbledore bail him out? The theory here is that Dumbledore didn't want to. Dumbledore is portrayed in the books and films as being a skilled legilimens, which means that he's essentially able to read people's minds. He was also the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, which gave him access to Azkaban inmates. So my question is, couldn't he have easily just gone to Azkaban and found out the truth? Dumbledore's word was enough to have Snape's name cleared, so surely, if he had found out the truth, he could have done something for Sirius. Didn't he owe that to him? I think that the potential morbid reality of this situation is that Dumbledore knew that Sirius was innocent all along, but allowed him to be imprisoned in Azkaban because he felt that his imprisonment would be better for the wizarding world as a whole. Here's why. Sirius Black was Harry's godfather, and being so close to the Potters, would have likely taken young Harry under his wing after the death of his parents. If he were given a trial, I think that it's highly likely that Sirius would have claimed guardianship over Harry. I also think that it's particularly interesting that Sirius never got a trial at all, particularly as other Death Eaters did. It seems almost too convenient that he never got a chance to speak his case, as though one of his allies had persuaded the Ministry that he was sure of Black's guilt, Dumbledore. But Dumbledore never wanted Sirius to rot in Azkaban for no reason. He had a purpose, and this purpose came down to baby Harry and what Harry would need to achieve over the course of his lifetime. If Sirius had taken guardianship of Harry, he would have never lived with the Dursleys, and though they were awful to Harry, it may have actually kept him alive. Because Aunt Petunia was Harry's blood relative, it was believed that Lily's act of sacrificial protection would continue on and be transmitted through Petunia, keeping Harry safe. Though Harry would have been happier with Sirius, he could never have been as safe. Dumbledore didn't dislike Sirius, it was just that, in his eyes, his imprisonment was essential to secure the fate of the wizarding world. 5. Harry's imagination. Brace yourself, because this one has been floating around the internet for a long time and is a bit heartbreaking. I am of course talking about the theory that Hogwarts, witches, wizards, magic, wands and broomsticks are purely a figment of Harry's imagination. This theory is based around the idea that Harry, a downtrodden young boy, had to imagine and create his own reality, a world that he could escape to when his own world became too much to handle. If we go by this theory, the only real aspects of the Harry Potter universe are that Harry lives with the Dursleys and that Harry's parents are in fact dead. However, if the magical world never actually existed, then it would of course mean that Harry's parents weren't killed by the powerful Lord Voldemort. They really did just die in a car crash, as the Dursleys always told him. One thing is for certain, in both realities, the Dursleys are awful to Harry, and according to the theory, it's their nature that pushes him to the point of creating his own imaginary world. In the Harry Potter books and films, Harry is only left with the Dursleys because by staying with them, it meant that he was safe from Voldemort, the result of Lily's loving sacrifice. The only logical explanation for Harry staying with them in this other circumstance is that Harry simply didn't have other family. He had nowhere else to go. Orphaned by a horrible car crash that claimed the lives of both of his parents, Harry was forced to go and live with Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. Oh, and we can't forget the awful Dudley. The Dursleys were truly awful to Harry, and I have no doubt in my mind that their behaviour could push a young man who had already lost his parents to the point of, well, insanity, to the point of creating his own reality. The following passage from the book confirms that A. Harry had no other family, and that B. He dreamed and dreamed of his life changing for the better. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family. Now that's a dark theory, if you ask me. Voldemort wanted to completely destroy Harry. It's a well-known fact, for those of you who have read or seen The Goblet of Fire, that Voldemort's intentions throughout the entire plotline of this installment is to capture Harry at the end of the third task of the Triwizard Tournament, use his blood to reincarnate his own form, and then kill him. But what if his plan was even darker and more sinister than all that? Is it not possible that the Dark Lord wanted to completely destroy Harry in every aspect possible? This theory suggests that Voldemort's plan went beyond killing Harry and leaving him for dead. For after his resurrection, the Dark Lord very easily could have dismembered Harry and taken a part of his body to create a Polyjuice potion. Upon using the potion to take on Harry's appearance, imagine that he returned to Hogwarts and went on to wreak havoc within the castle and destroy the reputation of the boy who lived. Disguised as Harry, Voldemort could have murdered other students and teachers, stolen priceless and powerful magical artifacts, retrieved his Horcrux that resided there, and then fled, leaving death and destruction in his wake, the responsibility of which would have all fallen on Harry. Death Eaters are actually cannibals. As the followers of the Dark Lord, Death Eaters were an organization of pure-blood supremacists who believed in their right to rule over Muggles and eradicate half-blood and Muggle-born witches and wizards. By the end of the Harry Potter series, it's no secret that, in addition to his supremacist and dictatorship views, Voldemort's primary goal in life was to become immortal. And so, the belief of many in the wizarding world is that his followers got their name due to the idea that the Dark Lord wished to vanquish death, or to put more plainly, to eat death. But I'm not entirely sold on that being the full story. I think that the following theory does much to explain the name of Voldemort's followers in a way that completely matches up with what we know about the Dark Lord and his army of evil witches and wizards. They were cannibals. Simply put, imagine that in order to become a Death Eater, a witch or wizard would need to eat another human to officially pledge themselves to Voldemort. The Kiss can turn people into Dementors. The ghoul-like magical beings known wizarding worldwide as the Dementors are some of the darkest creatures introduced throughout the Harry Potter series. From what we know about them, they feed themselves on the souls of humans and wizards alike and become energized by taking any and all feelings of happiness from those around them. Dementors are also the guards of the wizarding prison Azkaban and, in extreme circumstances, will perform an irreversible act on witches and wizards who have been condemned for their unspeakable crimes, an act known as the Dementor's Kiss, or simply the Kiss. The effects of the kiss result in the person or victim becoming somewhat of a shell of their former self, a husk of a human, with the Dementor who performed the kiss having sucked out their soul, leaving their body to function without any real sentience. However, imagine if the kiss did more than remove one's soul. What if the Dementor's kiss was just the initial phase of turning a human into a Dementor themselves? This theory is based on the idea that the Dementor's dark magic extends past the point of simply chilling the air and sucking all the warmth and happiness from their environment, to the point that it could also breed its dark magic within a soulless human vessel, filling it with their mists of despair. There's also the fact that Dementors do not breed, at least not like humans, which begs the question, how do more Dementors come into being? The only explanation we have currently is the rather vague, they grow like fungi where there is decay through mists of despair. But if the kiss could turn people into Dementors, that would provide a much more substantial answer to this question, a theory which seems to be alluded to in The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Professor Lupin explains the following to Harry. Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. Even muggles feel their presence, though they can't see them. Get too near a Dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. You'll be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life. Not to mention that this theory would explain how Dementors were originally born, since all that is known is that they come from the darkness of the mansion believed to have been the home of an incredibly evil wizard, a CREEPIEST, in the 1400s, a home which eventually became the prison of Azkaban. Many speculate that it was a CREEPIEST's dark magical experiments and acts of torture that contributed to the Dementors' creation, so it's rather plausible to think that it was through a CREEPIEST's dark magic that Dementors first manifested in witches and wizards that he was torturing and experimenting on, resulting in the victims becoming devoid of a soul and transformed beyond recognition. Continuing to create more Dementors within Azkaban, undetected by the wizarding world, would then be relatively easy for the Dementors to do, since they are the ones responsible for burying the dead at the prison. Just imagine if they never actually buried anyone. The etymology of Avada Kedavra. Of the three unforgivable curses, the killing curse is by far the darkest, with the effects of this spell snuffing out the life of any living thing it comes into contact with. Producing a stream of green light, the incantation for this curse is Avada Kedavra, which is rooted in Aramaic, a language most closely related to Hebrew, Syriac, and Phoenician, and translates in English to "let the thing be destroyed." Of course, you've likely noticed just how similar the incantation of the killing curse is to the common magician saying of abracadabra, which brings us to the theory at hand, that the similarities between Avada Kedavra and abracadabra are no accident, and instead signify long-standing violence between the wizarding world and muggles. We know for certain that the killing curse has been around since at least 1717, when Avada Kedavra was classified as an unforgivable curse and made illegal. So imagine that prior to this law being instated, that many witches and wizards, in protecting themselves, their families, and their communities, or in believing themselves to be superior beings, used this curse on muggles throughout the Middle Ages in the areas in which Aramaic was spoken. During this time, it's possible that some muggles may have witnessed the usage of this curse, and come away with tales of people with magical abilities saying Avada Kedavra, which may have eventually evolved into abracadabra. What's more, as this is the one well-known incantation that survived Muggle culture throughout the centuries, it's fairly clear that the predominant interaction between the wizarding world and the human one was quite violent indeed. Harry actually dies from the killing curse. Near the end of the Deathly Hallows, Harry bravely chooses to meet his death at the hands of Voldemort in order to allow his allies, friends, and loved ones a fighting chance at defeating the Dark Lord. And after a brief stint in what appears to be limbo, parading around King's Cross, Harry decides to go back to the world of the living, with the killing curse only having destroyed the bit of Voldemort's soul that resided inside of him. But what if everything that happens after Harry meets a dead Dumbledore in King's Cross is a continuation of his version of the afterlife? Imagine that he never actually came back to life, and in reality, he did in fact die. What happens after his brief chat in Limbo is just what he hopes would have happened back in the real world. His final defeat of Voldemort, fulfilling his destiny as the hero he was always said to be, creating peace, and eventually marrying Ginny and having children that he named after loved ones. But what about the rest of the Battle of Hogwarts, you may be asking? I believe that very well could have been the test he was given to get into the afterlife to show that he was worthy of peace. Forgetful Neville. Neville's parents aren't mentioned that often in the films, and they also sort of lead us to believe that they had been killed by Bellatrix. However, book readers will know that this is not the case. In The Order of the Phoenix, the trio run into Neville and his grandmother at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. It's here that it's revealed that Neville's parents are in fact alive, but were just driven insane through Bellatrix's horrific torture. In heartbreaking fashion, Neville would go and visit his parents every Christmas to spend the day with them, despite them barely recognizing who he is. All of this considered, I think it goes without saying that Neville suffered an incredible amount of childhood trauma. Which brings me to the theory introduced on Reddit. The reason why Neville is so forgetful is because the official treatment in the wizarding world for childhood trauma is obliviation. The spell never permanently took for Neville because he is, after all, a pretty powerful wizard, but the repeated treatments left him with permanent memory issues. Another Reddit user commented on this theory further. I imagine they thought they were doing him a favor because of what happened to his parents. The obliviation theory ties into the possibility that he was the one who witnessed them being tortured as a child, which could totally link to his social anxiety as a prepubescent and his fear of Snape specifically. If this disturbing theory doesn't make you look at Neville differently, then I don't know what will. Not only does it suggest that Neville witnessed the torture of his parents firsthand, but it also explains his unusual behavior and forgetful nature. Reality of resurrection. We are first educated on the resurrection stone during the tale of the three brothers. Then the second brother, who was an arrogant man, decided that he wanted to humiliate Death still further, and asked for the power to recall others from death. So Death picked up a stone from the riverbank and gave it to the second brother, and told him that the stone would have the power to bring back the dead. According to the legend of the Deathly Hallows, the stone was created by Death himself and has the power to bring back lost loved ones. In the series, Harry uses it in the Forbidden Forest to summon the images of his loved ones. However, while the stone was initially thought to bring back the dead, we later learn that it only brings back a shade of these people, less substantial than living bodies, but much more than ghosts. And one Reddit user challenged the function of the stone even further with the following theory. The resurrection stone will always show your loved ones the way you wish they were, not their actual spirits, and they will eventually, or quickly in Harry's case, drive you to commit suicide, regardless of what the actual spirits of your loved ones want. This disturbing theory adds an incredibly ominous spin to the following book passage. "You're nearly there," said James. "Very close. We are so proud of you. Does it hurt?" The childish question had fallen from Harry's lips before he could stop it. "Dying? Not at all," said Sirius. "Quicker and easier than falling asleep. This one feels dark." Polyjuice problems. The Polyjuice potion, which is a complex and time-consuming concoction, is best left to highly skilled witches and wizards. It enables the consumer to assume the physical appearance of another person, as long as they have first procured part of that individual's body to add to the brew. The effect of the potion is only temporary, and depending on how well it has been brewed, may last anything from between 10 minutes and 12 hours. You can change age, sex, and race by taking the Polyjuice potion, but not species. The Polyjuice potion is perhaps most notably used by Barty Crouch Jr. when he impersonates Mad-Eye Moody and teaches defense against the dark arts. It's an incredibly powerful potion with endless possibilities. And when I say endless possibilities, this Reddit theory will give you a better understanding of what I mean. I always thought there would be some naughty uses for Polyjuice potion, like there would be a market for famous people's hair, so you and your partner could indulge in fantasy. Another user commented, "And celebrities would probably make bank selling their hair for Polyjuice potion." I have to admit that this is not something I'd ever considered, but it does, unfortunately, seem quite plausible. The real veil. The veil is a massive ancient stone archway that stands in the center of the Death Chamber inside the Department of Mysteries. Conventional wisdom would suggest that it acts as a sort of portal between the lands of the living and the dead, and it's believed that those who step through the veil, or fall through, become trapped in the world of death, aka they die. Those who stand close enough and have belief in the afterlife are also able to hear faint whisperings that appear to come from the other side. But one thing that's worth considering is that no one truly knows how the veil works, because once you go through, it's impossible to come back. The whole portal between the land of the living and the dead thing is just based on speculation. And it's this lack of definitive information that helped one Reddit user come up with the following theory. Not a theory, I heard, but it's something I do think of from time to time. The fact that Sirius Black never really died. Luna had mentioned hearing voices near the veil. It made me think that maybe the veil was purgatory. So Sirius, who spent his life trying to escape prisons and living in memories of loved ones, spends eternity the same way. Nobody bothered figuring out how the veil worked in the series, so I can imagine Sirius spending eternity either wanting to go back to Harry or to move on and join James. The theory essentially asserts that Sirius, who had spent his life trying to escape prisons and holding on to memories of loved ones, may be trapped in eternity in a similar way. Someone did respond that if this was the case, that Sirius wouldn't have been able to come back in the Forbidden Forest. However, I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that. I don't think the shades have anything to do with the genuine spirits of loved ones that have moved on, and are instead, as the previous theory stated, false representations of loved ones that try to convince you to end your life. Horcrux horrors. We all know what a Horcrux is by now, and if you don't, then I'm not entirely sure what series you've been reading and watching. Hopefully not Twilight. The shortest possible summary of Horcruxes is that they are objects of dark magic created by a witch or wizard who wishes to live forever by immortalizing a piece of their soul inside a vessel of their choosing. However, besides committing an act of murder, the entire Horcrux creation process is a little murky. No one, besides Voldemort and maybe a few other dark wizards, knows the process in its entirety, which leaves it open to exciting and disturbing theories. Which brings me to the following Reddit theory. The real secret to creating a Horcrux was that you had to eat part of your victim after killing them, even just a drop of blood. Killing someone splits the soul of the killer. A spell is then used to transfer part of the soul to an object, a Horcrux. Eating a part of the victim is an act that replaces the lost part of the soul with something vile and stolen, and allows the killer to live without a complete soul because they're patching it with dark magic. In essence, this theory asserts that the murderer must eat part of the victim. In other words, the unknown ritual is cannibalism. There's lots of good support around this theory, including the sheer fact that cannibalism is revolting. But for another thing, cannibalism is present in many literary works through the ages, and Rowling has been known to find inspiration in classical literature. Of course, there's the issue that none of Voldemort's victims who are linked to the creation of his Horcruxes had anything notably missing from their bodies. Although, as powerful as he was, it's not out of the question that he was able to feed off the insides of these victims without leaving any noticeable marks.
Lavender Brown's dark side. In case you can't remember, Lavender Brown was a pure-blood witch who started at Hogwarts in the same year as Harry, Ron, and Hermione. She was actually the first new sorted Gryffindor of her year, and for years, Lavender attended Hogwarts alongside the trio, even sharing a dormitory with Hermione. However, there was never much attention placed on her until the 6th installment of the series, when her character really blossomed. You see, it was in her 6th year that Lavender developed an unusual infatuation with Ron Weasley. During this particular school year, she began showering him with compliments and flirtatious gestures, which Ron seemed to enjoy. Eventually, their relationship took a romantic turn after Ron had a falling out with Hermione. Throughout their 2-month relationship, Lavender exhibited intense affection and possessiveness towards Ron, going as far as calling him One-One and giving him a Christmas necklace labeled Sweetheart. However, following the holidays, their relationship started to deteriorate. Following his poisoning, Ron starts pulling away from her, pretending to be asleep when she visits him in the hospital wing and avoiding her affections. Eventually, Ron reconciles with Hermione, leading Lavender to suspect a connection between them. After witnessing Ron and Hermione seemingly leaving together, she decides to end their relationship. But here's where it gets juicy. One popular theory online is that Ron was never genuinely interested in Lavender at all, and that all of the affection directed towards her was actually the result of a love potion like Amortentia. The theory posits that Lavender gave Ron the potion prior to and for the duration of their relationship. However, because she was unable to give him the potion during his stint in hospital, it eventually wore off and he grew to dislike her. This could explain Ron's sudden interest in Lavender, as well as his sudden disinterest in her. And this certainly wouldn't be the first time that we've heard of love potions being used in the story. Voldemort's mother famously uses a love potion on his father, Tom Riddle Sr., and during Harry's time at Hogwarts, a fellow student named Romilda Vane plotted to use one of the potions on Harry himself. During Christmas of the same year, when Harry was invited to Professor Slughorn's lavish Christmas party, Romilda plotted with her friends in the girls' bathroom to somehow give Harry a love potion from Weasley's Wizard Wheezers. In March of the same year, Harry accidentally drops love potion-spiked chocolate cauldrons given to him by Romina on the floor while looking for the Marauders map. Ron, thinking they are a birthday present, eats them and becomes infatuated with Romilda. He professes his love for her in front of Harry, gets into a physical altercation with him, and tries to force his way into Slughorn's office, believing Romilda is inside. However, Horace Slughorn eventually intervenes and gives Ron an antidote, which he believes to be a tonic for the nerves, and the potion's effects wear off. If Romilda Vane was willing to do it, why not Lavender? Something was seriously wrong with the girls that year. There are a number of elements that help bolster this theory. First of all, love potions were easy to get. You could buy them at Weasley's Wizard Wheezers, no questions asked. The next thing worth examining is that despite Lavender flirting repeatedly with Ron, he only ever showed her a little bit of interest. A love potion could have been all she needed to get the chance with him that she felt she deserved. What's also important to consider is that Ron and Lavender first got together at the Quidditch party. At this party, there were a large number of drinks and many opportunities for her to spike Ron's butterbeer. The next indicator that Ron may have been given a love potion is the fact that his interest in Lavender seemed both sudden and superficial. It's well known that potions like Amortentia cannot produce genuine love, only strong obsession or infatuation that mimics love. Given that Ron and Lavender are constantly engaged in PDA and show no real personal connection to one another, this could be a clue that this was the potion at work. The last clue the love potion may have been at play is the fact that Ron and Lavender break up after Slughorn gives him an antidote for the love potion that he unknowingly digested from Romilda Vane. It's possible that by curing Ron of Romilda's potion, Slughorn unknowingly gave Ron the antidote for Lavender's potion as well. It's been expressed that even Parvati Patil, Lavender's best friend, was uncomfortable with how unhealthy her obsession was toward Ron. Perhaps she knew more than she let on. Creepy. Lockhart's deepest secret. Gilderoy Lockhart had a lot of secrets, and one of his most significant secrets is that all of the heroic deeds and magical feats he boasts about are actually the achievements of other witches and wizards. He would interview these individuals, learn about their exploits, and then use powerful memory charms to erase their memories, allowing him to take credit for their accomplishments. To add insult to injury, he novelized these experiences. And what was his spell of choice to exploit these witches and wizards? Why, Obliviate, of course. After Lockhart was hired, many of the staff were baffled with the decision that Dumbledore had made. However, it's later revealed that Dumbledore strategically hired Lockhart. You see, Dumbledore knew that Lockhart was a fraud, or at least suspected it, and the following excerpt from Pottermore supports this. Albus Dumbledore's plans, however, ran deep. He happened to have known two of the wizards for whose life's work Gilderoy Lockhart had taken credit, and was one of the only people in the world who thought he knew what Lockhart was up to. Dumbledore wanted to put Lockhart in a position where he would effectively expose himself, because you see, talented wizard though he was, Lockhart had spent so many years perfecting memory charms that his ability in other aspects of magic was very unimpressive. And while Dumbledore's plan may have worked out in the end, with Lockhart eventually being exposed as a fraud, the following dark theory suggests that some of his students may have ended up as collateral damage in Lockhart's deepest secret of them all. Lockhart ended up teaching for one school year in the Chamber of Secrets, where he served as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. But here's the thing, he was a profoundly bad teacher that was constantly revealing his own incompetence. He had little power or control in the classroom. But what power does a teacher have over his students? Why, the ability to place them in detention, of course. And here's the thing, detentions provided a perfect cover for Lockhart's manipulations. Under the guise of answering fan mail, he had students in a controlled environment where he could easily obliviate them, erasing any doubts they might have had about his abilities. This would leave students with a reinforced belief in his greatness, feeding Lockhart's insatiable ego and ensuring his fabricated stories went unchallenged. Any student that would challenge Lockhart would end up in this situation. Why? Well, I suspect that his primary goal here would be self-preservation, ensuring that any witnesses to his incompetence or inconsistencies couldn't expose him. His deep-seated narcissism and need for admiration drove him to manipulate students' memories in order to reinforce a false narrative of his greatness. But who knows what else he did before obliviating them. Voldemort's most twisted scheme. You know how Barty Crouch Jr. masquerades as Mad-Eye Moody for an entire book? And remember how during the Battle of the Seven Potters, most of the Order of the Phoenix used Polyjuice to transform into Harry? Both of these circumstances prove that, with a bit of Polyjuice potion, anything is possible. However, what you probably never expected to hear me say is that Voldemort once had a plan to impersonate Harry. Well, at least that's how the theory on Reddit goes. Redditor Mitch6 revealed the following theory. Voldemort's plan in GOF was to kill Harry in the maze and make Polyjuice, returning to the games as Harry. He'd decapitate Harry so he could keep making Polyjuice and inspire fear in the hearts of the Order by making them watch their chosen one and hero become a dark wizard as powerful and evil as Voldy, before finally revealing himself to the world with Harry's now bald and decaying skull. If it's unclear, the theory basically states this. After killing Harry in the maze, Voldemort intends to assume Harry's identity using Polyjuice Potion. However, in order to ensure that he had a continuous supply of hair for said potion, Voldemort decapitates Harry and carries his head around with him. The logic here is that the Triwizard Tournament provided the perfect cover for this scheme, with the maze offering an ideal setting for Harry's murder. From there, Voldemort would masquerade as Harry and work to undermine the Order of the Phoenix. In doing so, he would break spirits, manipulate allies, and spread fear. Harry, in the eyes of his loved ones and allies, would effectively slowly descend into dark wizarddom, and after enough time, Voldemort would eventually reveal his true identity by putting Harry's decaying head on display. Let's just hope that he didn't pursue a relationship with Ginny. It seems a bit far-fetched and probably not all that necessary on Voldemort's part, but certainly some food for thought. Cedric's fate. A blast of green light blazed through Harry's eyelids, and he heard something heavy fall to the ground beside him. The pain in his scar reached such a pitch that he retched, and then it diminished. Terrified of what he was about to see, he opened his stinging eyes. Cedric was lying spread-eagled on the ground beside him. For a second that contained an eternity, Harry stared into Cedric's face, at his open grey eyes, blank and expressionless as the windows of a deserted house, at his half-open mouth, which looked slightly surprised. In the Goblet of Fire, we encounter a shocking and emotional moment as Harry grabs the Triwizard Cup portkey with one hand and touches Cedric's body with the other, transporting them both from the maze back to Hogwarts. The moment symbolizes Harry's loss of innocence and marks a turning point in the series. However, some fans of the series were quick to point out that they had seen no other instances of people traveling through a portkey indirectly, that is, via someone else holding onto them. In every other instance, a person could only be transported if they touched the portkey themselves. They can, however, bring along as many objects as they'd like. But if that's the case, how did Harry bring Cedric with him? The morbid theory suggests that because Cedric had died and his soul had left his body, he was no longer a person. And because his body was now just an empty container, Harry was able to transport Cedric's body as he would any other object. Dumbledore's Dark Plan. For those of you who may not know, an Obscurial is a young witch or wizard who is physically or emotionally abused to the point that they feel the need to repress their magic and hide their abilities. This repression is directly related to trauma experienced as a result of their magic and a development of hatred, fear, or shame in regard to their powers. These extremely negative emotions, combined with their attempt to suppress their magic, then turns into a parasitical force comprised of dark magic known as an Obscurus. Now you might be thinking, young wizard subjected to emotional and physical abuse, sounds like Harry fits the bill. However, despite being subjected to all of this abuse over the years, Harry actually ended up being a pretty well-adjusted young boy. Sure, he wished he could have been raised in different circumstances, but the young Harry that we meet in the Philosopher's Stone doesn't seem to be too ashamed of who he is. Far from it. He actually seems quite sure of himself, aware that his relatives are silly and frivolous people, making friends with Ron before he even arrives at Hogwarts, turning away alliances with unkind wizards like Draco Malfoy, and asking the Sorting Hat not to place him in Slytherin. The other key component here is that Harry didn't ever have to repress his magical abilities because he never even knew he had them. Repressing one's magical abilities is potentially the most important part of an Obscurus forming. The Dursleys were too frightened of magic ever to acknowledge its existence to Harry, while Vernon and Petunia had a confused hope that if they were nasty enough to Harry, his strange abilities might somehow evaporate. They never taught him to be ashamed or afraid of magic. Even when he was scolded for making things happen, he didn't make any attempt to suppress his true nature, nor did he ever imagine that he had the power to do so. But here's the kicker. When handing Harry off to the Dursleys, Dumbledore never instructed them not to inform Harry of his magical heritage. In fact, the letter actually told the Dursleys to explain magic and his history to Harry at some point, which explains Hagrid's reaction when he learns that Harry knows nothing of his past. Therefore, Dumbledore likely assumed that at some point or another, Harry would learn of his magical heritage. But what Dumbledore also knew was that Vernon and Petunia Dursley were particularly awful people with a complete disgust of magic. People that in no way, shape or form would have supported Harry using it. Bearing all of this in mind, it stands to reason that Dumbledore may have been trying to turn Harry into an Obscurial. Dumbledore was fully aware of the imminent threat that was Voldemort, and it may be that he wanted to use Harry as a weapon in the event that Voldemort returned to power. This theory asserts that Dumbledore knowingly instructed Harry's emotionally abusive aunt and uncle to inform him of his magical heritage, despite knowing that suppressing magic produces a dark parasitic force. Just another example of creepy manipulation by Dumbledore in a world full of theories. Before you attack me in the comments, this is just a fun theory. Dumbledore is one of my favorite characters. And that's it for this video. Which theory was most disturbing to you? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live